My brothers were in North Carolina at Kitty Hawk from June of 1900 to the summer of 1903. That summer of 1903, they finally saw success. Their glider was in the air for 59 seconds. Now, it doesn't seem like much, but to them it was truly a piece of success that they had longed for. That summer of 1903, the end of the summer, they came back to Dayton. They felt that maybe they would start doing more experimentation out on Huffman Prairie, which was out in the country outside of Dayton. I would tell my fellow teachers and my students, come on out on Sunday afternoon and see my brothers give their demonstration of their miraculous flying machine. And then I'd be walking home after school, and I'd walk past the barber shop, and I could hear the fellows inside talking and gossiping. And I heard them say, have you seen what those odd Wright brothers are doing out on the prairie? They've been odd ever since they were little kids. My brothers gave 50 demonstrations, and our newspaper did not print one word about these demonstrations. My brothers were able to secure a patent for their airplane. But anyway, in the meantime, that was later. It was 1904, and the World's Fair was taking place in St. Louis, Missouri. I'd never been out of Ohio, so I thought, this is my chance. And I called my good friend, Margaret Goodwin, who I had been at Oberlin with, and asked her if she'd like to join me. So we met in St. Louis. I can't tell you how excited I was. It was absolutely miraculous. Things to do, things to see. Do you know there were 62 pavilions representing 62 different countries, and 48 pavilions representing 48 American cities? There were all kinds of things to do. There were carousel rides. There were gondola rides. There were elephant rides. There were rickshaw rides. I'd never seen a Chinese person in real life. Also, there were yummy things to eat. We indulged ourselves and got cotton candy on a stick. It was horrible for us, but boy, did it taste good. And then there were these funny little sausages that you put in a bun with mustard. Very salty, but very satisfying. And at day's end, Margaret and I would seat ourselves on a bench and people watch. It was a little bit warm, so we indulged ourselves and bought ice creams in a cone. Now, we were there for 3 days, and I was having the time of my life. Margaret, not so much. She was suffering from gastric distress, so she went back home. Her gastric distress seemed to get worse and became an infection. Her resistance was lowered, and she contracted tuberculosis. My dear friend Margaret died that year. I couldn't believe it. I felt awful. I had lost my dear friend, and I felt so guilty that I had lured her to St. Louis. So I decided at that point that I needed a new passion. I needed a positive path. So I made myself executive secretary for my brothers. And as I mentioned earlier, in 1906, they were able to secure the patent for their airplane and were determined to sell it to a more forward-thinking customer. The brothers arrived in Europe in 1907. While they were overseas, Katharine took care of the correspondence with the newspapers and the magazines and helped these publications to keep their stories straight. She screened business offers and even sent Webster's Dictionary a photograph of the glider. And she was still teaching High School and running the household, along with their housekeeper, Carrie. Her days were very full, and when letters arrived from Will and Orv from overseas, they talked only of the progress of more test flights and about the scientists that they were meeting. Katharine, who always was up for a good time, she wanted to hear about the sights they were seeing, or were they taking a boat trip down the Rhine, or were they dining on escargot at a Paris cafe, or had they gone to Spain to see the bullfights? In September of 1908, Orville and Wilbur received a telegram from the United States Signal Army Corps at Fort Myer Military Base in Northern Virginia. They were requesting that Orville come and give a demonstration of the glider. Of course, the boys were very excited as they could get, because they felt at this point, the United States was finally showing some interest in their invention. The day of the demonstration, Katharine received a startling telegram. Oh no, severe accident, stop. Orville Wright injured, stop. Please come immediately, stop. Passenger killed? Oh, this is awful. Well, I took a leave of absence from my teaching job. I got on a train. I went to Northern Virginia. I walked into the hospital, walked into the room where Orville was in bed. He was so glad to see me that he started to cry. Well, I said to him, "You look like a trussed-up turkey." And then he started to laugh. His leg was in a sling. His arm was in a sling. He was bandaged all up. He was cut and bruised. But he smiled at me, told me how glad he was to see me. Now, the doctors and the nurses were taking very good care of Orville, but I knew little brother, which is what I called him. I knew him. I knew how sensitive he was. And I realized that he would not be completely well unless I sat by his bedside until he felt like himself again. So I sat there for 7 weeks. And during the day, I would read to him, tell him funny anecdotes. We'd have good conversation. And in the evening, I would massage his leg. He told me one day what had happened. He said there was a young officer who wanted to go up in the glider with him. He knew that this was not a good idea because this young man was quite a large boy. He figured that the glider just could not handle all that weight. Well, they'd been up not more than 2 minutes, and the glider could not handle all that weight, and it came crashing down, and the young man died. Fortunately, my brother survived. Well, by October of 1908, we were back in Dayton, safe and sound. Will was still overseas. In November, we received a telegram. It said, this was from Wilbur, it said, "I need you now. Please come immediately." So I quit my job at Steele High School, and Orv and I boarded an ocean liner headed for adventure.